Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm so thrilled to introduce our next speaker, our Exoneree fellow, Shareef Kuzan. In 1999, I was living here in Philadelphia, blissfully ignorant of errors in the criminal justice system. And a colleague of mine who was working on a death penalty case in New Orleans for a man named John Thompson, my colleague was representing him, and he went down to New Orleans actually because John's final appeal had been rejected. And he went down to tell John that John was going to be executed in 6 weeks. And he returned from that trip having learned of a blood test that had been conducted on a during a pretrial hearing in one of John's cases that had never been disclosed. And the results of that blood test led to John's ultimate exoneration 5 years later in 2004. And the story blew me away, and it affected me so much that I wrote a book about it, and the book changed my life and the trajectory of my life and got me into criminal justice reform. While I was talking to John about the book, he said, "There's a guy you got to talk to named Shareef Kuzan." He said, "This happens all the time." He said, 50% of the guys on Angola's death row have been put there. They didn't do it. They've been put there by prosecutorial misconduct. And that was when I learned about our guest, Mr. Kuzan. Shareef had been charged and convicted in 1996. I'm sorry, did I get that? I got that date wrong.
Yeah,
95, 96. Convicted of a robbery and murder in 1996 based on an eyewitness identification process that would not stand muster today, and the testimony of another witness who actually stated at court that his testimony had been coerced by the police. Notwithstanding that, he was sentenced to death, and because he was 16 at the time, he became the youngest person on death row in the United States. I'm going to let Shareef tell you his story, but to the point of half the men on death row being innocent. Part of the reason that we're particularly honored to have Shareef here is his connection to New Orleans. The DA for 30 years in New Orleans was a man named Harry Connick Sr. You may have heard of his son, who's a singer and actor of some repute. The lawyer in Shareef's case, Roger Jordan, was implicated in several other prosecutorial misconduct cases and actually had his license suspended for 3 months, making him the only attorney in New Orleans, the only prosecutor in New Orleans to receive any penalty for prosecutorial misconduct to this day. That's kind of a shocking figure when you realize that there were 32 people who have had their sentences changed due to prosecutorial, or in New Orleans, 27 of which were due to prosecutorial misconduct. These numbers have come back into public light with Mr. Connick's recent passing, and I think it's important to keep those statistics out there to understand what the breadth and depth of misconduct in New Orleans was, and to recognize that New Orleans may not be an unusual jurisdiction in this regard, that this is happening in jurisdictions around the country. So there's no way that I can give a story as powerful as the one you're about to hear. So we're going to let Shareef tell you his story. Since his exoneration, he has become an incredible spokesperson, not only for the problems with the death penalty, but for challenges with compensation. And he's been an advocate for Louisiana's long time coming compensation statute. Pennsylvania legislators, I'm looking at you, since we don't have one yet in Pennsylvania. So Shareef will talk for as long as he wants to talk. And then we'll be doing the card thing for questions. And once Shareef has actually said once he gets to the Q&A, if any of you have questions, let us know as well, and we'll try to get the microphone to you as well. But give us the questions, and we'll start by moderating and then go from there. Okay? Please welcome Shareef Kuzan.
Thank you for having me, John. My name is Shareef Kuzan, and I'm number 77. That's the 77th person to have been exonerated from America's death row. Usually when I tell my story, I like to tell people I was never wrongfully convicted or wrongfully accused. I'm a person that likes to use the right words. I was framed. Wrongfully accused and framed brings a different mentality to the situation. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and when we think about New Orleans, the first thing we think about is Mardi Gras and the French Quarter, right? This crime that I was accused of happened in 1995. What was going on in 1995 in New Orleans? New Orleans had over 427 murders that year. We had police officers that was going to death row for murder. We had police officers that was going to prison for drug crimes. We were under a police consent decree. It was outrageous. The crime happened in the French Quarters. Now the French Quarters in Mardi Gras, that's one of New Orleans' biggest hospitality, biggest tourism. That's the biggest economy builder of our city. So if a crime happens in the French Quarter, someone has to go down for that crime, and someone has to go down for that crime fast. I want to tell you another thing that was going on in 1995. I was 16 years old, I was a sophomore in high school, and I was playing basketball. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I was just this innocent little kid that was straight-A student, never missed a day of school, listened to his parents all the time, didn't have truancy, never cut a class. I'm not going to even tell you that. But what I would tell you is that regardless of if I cut classes, regardless of how disrespectful I was to my mom, I was not a murderer. Before I tell you about the facts of the case, I want to tell you about the night of the murder. I was playing basketball. We had a game. Usually our game started at about 6 o'clock in the afternoon, 6:30. I was 16 years old, so if any of you play, we have the little kids, they have the games first, the 9 and the 10-year-olds, or sometimes the 12 and the 13s. The older kids would definitely play last. I always had the pleasure of getting a ride home from my coach because my coach lived 1 block away from my home. So when all the other kids had to find out how they're going to get home, the parents had to pick them up, I never had to worry about that because I knew I was going to get a ride from my coach. This particular night, our game didn't start at 8:30. Our game didn't start until 9 o'clock, 9:30, because they had other games that went into overtime. So our game ended about 10:15, 10:30 that night. I got a ride home from my coach. My coach actually had dropped off 3 of my teammates off, and I was last because he lived a block away from my house. I didn't get home till about 11 o'clock that night. Took a bath like nothing any other day. I want you to remember that. The crime happened in New Orleans in the French Quarters about 10 o'clock one night. The gentleman with his girlfriend that was coming out of the Porter Call restaurant, a popular hamburger joint in the French Quarters. As they were leaving from that date, someone robbed the victim in front of his girlfriend and blew his brains out. That's traumatic for her. I could not stand here and tell you how it feels to watch somebody get their brains blown out right next to you. They said it was 3 black individuals. I want you to remember that. Now we're talking the French Quarters. If you ever see the French Quarters on the news through Mardi Gras, you see people standing on the big balconies, throwing beads, having fun in the big high balconies. So there was a gentleman who said that he was on his balcony that night with his binoculars, bird watching. He said that he heard gunshots and he saw 3 men run and jump in a car that was right below his balcony. So he said he took his binoculars and he put him down a little bit and he got the license plate of the getaway car and called 911. So on the night of the murder, the girlfriend who was with the victim, very traumatic, she said that she could not identify someone because she was crying and she was visibly shaken up, which is understandable. You're not worried about trying to get a description of the person. You're worried about if you're going to be next. So 3 days later, in the comfort of their own home, the detective had given her a chance to calm down, so they went back to her home 3 days later. And she gave a more detailed statement. She said that she didn't get a good look at the perpetrators. It was dark. She didn't have her glasses on. She didn't have her contacts on. She said that the perpetrator was taller than her boyfriend, which he was about maybe 5'10" at the time. And she said that from her imagination, it looked like the person was a little bigger. She said, but I don't know if this is coming from imagination or what. So she basically said she didn't have her glasses, she couldn't identify anyone, it was dark, and she just couldn't make it out. So on the night of the crime, the detective had one piece of information to work with, the license plate of the getaway car, right? So he said that he ran a plate and he went to the home of the person that owns the car. No one was there. 2 weeks later, someone called Crime Stoppers and gave up the names of some people. None of them were mine. So in 2 weeks, the detective's still trying to locate the getaway car and also locate the individuals who someone called Crime Stoppers on, right? So a couple of days later, the detective said he finally found the car. And the car belonged to one of the individuals that someone called Crime Stoppers on. Now, I watched CSI. I grew up on Perry Mason. This is enough piece of information to let me know that you're on the right track. So he talked to the 3 individuals. One said that he was at home under the influence. The other one said that he was with his girlfriend that night. And the third one said that he was babysitting his niece and his nephew. The detective followed with the girlfriend. The girlfriend said he wasn't with her that night. So I don't know what happened, but this detective was taken off the case, and then another detective was placed on the case. When the second detective was placed on the case, miraculously someone called Crime Stoppers and said it was Shareef. So the detective had taken a picture of me and went back to the eyewitness, which is the girlfriend, and coerced her to say that it was me. Now, I was arrested for murder. During the time the detective came to my house to arrest me, I laughed at it because I thought it was a mistake. You know, you have the SWAT team kicking in my door, and telling me I'm being arrested for murder. So I'm like, you have the wrong person, man. You tripping, man. You know, I mean, I thought it was a joke. I was only a kid. I didn't know I was at a basketball game that night. I was incarcerated for a month and a half before we had found out that I had an alibi. It's not like any of us walk around with a notepad, 12:25, this is where I was at this time. If you didn't do something, the only thing you know is you didn't do it. What saved my life was my basketball coach. He said that one day he was sitting at home with his wife. He said, baby, I don't think that kid did that. It's just not sitting well with me. And she said, well, baby, check the records. Maybe it was that night you walked in here at almost 11 o'clock because it was their anniversary. And he said he checked the records, and sure enough, it was the night that he came in because it was the anniversary, and he walked in the door almost 11 o'clock, and she was mad as hell because you left at 5:36 saying you're going to a basketball game, you come back in at 11 o'clock at night. So you would think that now since we have the information of a basketball game, then my coach had took it upon himself and reached out to some of the other parents, and now we have a video of the game. So you would think with a video of the basketball game, with the coach, with the teammates, opposing teammates, referees, once we backed into all the information, you would think that, all right, this got to be a joke, right? Like, you have the wrong person. That didn't happen. The prosecutor still marched forward to take this case to trial. So as a defense attorney, you would think that, hey, I have the smoking gun. This is a high-profile case. We're going to blow them out the water with all the information that we have. We have teammates. We have other kids. We have everybody that could testify to where this kid was at the time of his murder. You have no gun. You have no physical evidence. You have nothing that ties this kid to this murder but the girlfriend who's saying that she's 100% sure that I'm the person and she will never forget that face for as long as she lives. During my trial, the statement that the girlfriend had given 3 days after the crime in the comfort of her home when she said that it was dark, she didn't have her contacts, she didn't have her glasses, and if this is come from imagination, we never received that statement. Even when this witness was on the stand, and it was very emotional, when she stood up, she pointed at me, and she said, "May God forgive you because I never will." Now you would think that we would have all of these teammates and opposing teammates and these other kids that can testify to where I was. For 3 days, they sat in the hallway waiting for them to be called to testify. On the third day, we started our defense right after lunch. I'll never forget it. The bailiff came through the courthouse. The judge said, "Defense, call your first witness." My lawyer, Your Honor, we call Michael Doss. Bailiff goes in the hallway, comes back, there's no Michael Doss. We call James Smith. We called Jamal Hardy. We called about 7 teammates and opposing teammates, and they were all out there right before lunch. They're not there. So my lawyer said that he thought, well, hey, maybe these kids got afraid and they all kind of goofed and just left. That wasn't the case. The prosecutor sat at his table and he heard us call every witness and he didn't say a word. It was after my defense was over that night that the kids told us that they stood in the DA's office until 1 o'clock in the morning. They took my witnesses and hid them in the DA's office so they couldn't testify. They didn't turn the statement over to us that would have blown her testimony out of the water. So you have a defense put on a defense that said his kid was at a basketball game. And the video we had, I know I'm telling my age a little bit, we had the VCR tapes. And you know with the VCR tapes, it was customary that, hey, we're going to recycle these. We're going to record over these things until we can't record anymore. You're going to record one show, then after you finish watching that one, you can record over them. So we only had a half of the game, but we wanted to show the video because we can show that this was an actual game. So, another part of it, my coach. My coach just knew he was doing the right thing. He called the police department, he called the DA's office, he said, hey, I have all the information to let this kid go. You know, the DA came out and took statements from him. So he said when the DA came out to get a statement from him, they had the little micro cassette recorders. And my coach said, he asked him, well, coach, what time did the game end this night? Coach said about 10:30. Then he asked the coach the next question, what time did the game normally end? 9:30. So during my trial, while my coach was on the stand, the DA tried to play a statement from him on a big cassette. And during this statement, he asked the coach, what time did the game end this night? And on the tape, it said 9:30, when in fact, the tape was dubbed. And when he dubbed it, he put the question together, what time did the game end this night? 9:30. So he was able to delete some of the information and put it together. Let me tell you about this detective that was placed on the case, the second one. By this happened in the first quarters of New Orleans, there was a $15,000 reward for any information for the rest of the person in this case. After my conviction, the detective was the one that called Crime Stoppers and received the money. I'll say that again. The detective, the second one that was placed on the case, when someone miraculously 3 days later called right after he was placed on the case and said, Shareef Kuzan, he called. As a juvenile, maybe about 5 or 6 months before that, I was arrested with a firearm. So I had a record. A juvenile with a record arrested for a firearm. I'm from the projects in the Ninth Ward, which became famous because of Katrina. I'm the 7th of 8 children. My mother was on welfare. So for me and for this detective, if we put this crime on this kid, no one would miss him. He's already headed down the wrong path. Poor family. We sticking with this, clean this case, move on. I mean, it sounds terrible, but it happens every day. It happens every day. Not only was I charged with murder, but I was also charged with an armed robbery that happened a block away from the murder in the French Quarter. Once I was arrested, someone called in and said, hey, I remember him on the news. I remember him, that's the one that robbed me. Now, if you're from New Orleans and you're a native of the city, the French Quarter is not even a place you hang out at. That's for people who's not from the city. Let alone going trying to do any hustling in the French Quarter, you're actually going to go to jail. Prior to this case, I think in my life I've probably been in the French Quarter once or twice as a kid. To get beignets at the beignet shop, Cafe Du Monde. Ride my bike, and we all go down to Cafe Du Monde and get some beignets. I knew nothing about the French Quarter. And I stand before you right now, I still don't know a thing about the French Quarters. So, as a result, I was convicted and sentenced to death at the age of 16 for a crime I didn't commit. Once the information had come out about the prosecutor withholding a statement from the eyewitness testimony, the prosecutor kidnapping my witnesses where they couldn't testify, We went to the Bar Association on him. We filed complaints with the New Orleans Integrity Division on a detective who called Crime Stoppers, and we were able to track the money and track it back to him. Nothing ever happened. The prosecutor, Roger Jordan, we were able to get a hearing and put him on the stand and ask him why did he hide the teammates. Guess what his answer was? This happened in January of 1996 at the motion for new trial. We were able to put him on the stand. He said that he put him in his office because they had air conditioning in his office and he wanted them to be comfortable. And he said that no one actually asked him if he had seen the witnesses. Unfortunately, if you look up New Orleans coldest winters, January of 1996, one of New Orleans coldest winters. While on death row, as a child, the only thing that kept my mind going was education. Me going to death row had a great impact on my family. My mom had to move from New Orleans to Worcester, Massachusetts, because she had to sell a home to try to help me out with defense attorneys. By the way, I didn't have public defenders. I had 3 capable private attorneys. Now they are judges in New Orleans and Louisiana. While on death row, I was represented by another attorney by the name of Clyde Stafford Smith, who uncovered all of these atrocities in my life. With the prosecutor, Roger Jordan, he did receive, this is the only case in Louisiana history where a prosecutor was actually disciplined by the Bar Association for prosecutorial misconduct. I received a death sentence for what he did. He received a 3-month suspended sentence for trying to intentionally kill me. I know a lot of people think once you get compensated, you become a millionaire. I beg to differ. I was never compensated. When I was released, Louisiana didn't have a compensation bill. Myself, John Thompson, Dan Bright, and a few other individuals, we lobbied Louisiana legislature for changes. 2007, we had some changes in compensation bill. I never got compensated because I took a principle stand. At the time when it was time for me to get compensated, Louisiana had a compensation law where they gave you $15,000 a year. I did the math, and it came up $7.15 an hour. So during a legislative hearing, I'm not going to tell you what I told the body of legislators during that time. But I thought that was disrespectful. I thought that was discriminatory. I just thought that it was another slap in the face. Now, in hindsight, never pass up free money. Take the money and then talk crap later. But I didn't do that. And not being compensated, I spent a total of 10 years of my life incarcerated. I came home, I went there as a kid, no responsibilities, never having a job. I came home a grown man, emotionally immature. I came home with depression problems, trust issues. Being away from my family for so long, I became a loner. Some people ask me, how did it affect me? Am I bitter? Am I upset? I'm pissed. I am pissed. What happened to me, it happened 26 years ago, but it still affects me as if it happened yesterday. I do these talks because this is also therapy for me. I hope it's educational and informative to you, but it's therapy for me. So if you see me cry, or if you see my voice get a bit raspy, it's only because I still feel the pain. I can talk all day, but I want to have interaction. Let's have interaction. There's a lot of questions. Let's have interactions.
Let me get a microphone up to you so that they can hear you on the screen.
I know a lot of some of these facts of the case that sound like, nah, man, this unreal. It's the truth. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Hello?
Right. You saw it, man.
Yo. Okay, Brother Shareef, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm another brother that I did 33 years on death row here in Pennsylvania. Okay? That's a little bit different than you because I wasn't exonerated. My co-defendant, he just got exonerated. All right? I understand where you're coming from because it's somewhat, our case is somewhat parallel. Okay? And I just want to say I relate and I feel you. That's all I want to say right now to you, brother.
Listen, like I said during my talk, what happened to me is not an isolated incident. It happens
And I feel it every day because I'm innocent. You understand?
Every day. And I salute
I
you.
feel it every
brother.
day. I don't give it every day, but I feel it every
Every day.
single day. Appreciate you.
Yes, I wanted you to speak a little bit on the compensation that went on and how that worked out, because I know that they awarded John Thompson, who served the most time, I think 36 years on death row, and how they awarded him the money and then overturned that and took it back.
Well, that was an actual lawsuit. That wasn't a compensation. Those are two different things. So Louisiana compensation bill goes, you have to have you have to be factually innocent for you to get compensation. And the second part of that is you also have to prove it. And a lot of times you would think that, you see on the news, person being released, with the hands up with the family, and now it's time for compensation, and they're still saying, you're guilty. You don't deserve it. So even though you're exonerated, that just doesn't automatically mean that you're going to get compensated, even if you're innocent.
Can I add in a little bit? Because the Thompson case that you cite, the Supreme Court case called Thompson versus Connick, and when John was exonerated and there was evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, I don't think it was quite as blatant as yours, but it was pretty blatant. Prosecutors get what's called absolute immunity from civil liability, which means you can't sue a prosecutor, even if they intentionally did. You can't. If Roger Johnson had said, "I deliberately hid those kids, I deliberately hid that information," and you tried to sue Roger Jordan, that case gets dismissed right away. What John's attorneys did was they sued the office, and in part because of cases like Shareef's and others, they were able to say that there was no training given to their lawyers about the rule that a prosecutor who has evidence that somebody might be innocent has to turn it over. There had been multiple instances where other prosecutors in the office had been found to have violated this, but there was no training. And what they basically said was, if you know this is a problem and you don't train about it, and by the way, they then did institute training, but it was wrong, then the office should pay for this. And John won $15 million, and that went up to the Supreme Court. And the rule is that you had to show a pattern or practice of the bad behavior. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who wrote the dissent, said, well, there was this Brady case, there was this case where they did it, there was the Shareef Kazan case where they did it, there were all these other cases that we know because Harry Connick put 36 men on death row, and 9 of them have had their sentence exonerated or commuted because of prosecutorial misconduct. And the majority opinion written by Clarence Thomas said, well, in John's case, it was a blood test. And in Shareef's case, it was hiding the witnesses. And in the other case, it was something else. So we don't have a pattern here. And what that does is it means that the pattern needs to be exact repeat of the behavior, or we're not going to call it a pattern. And at that point, we're slicing it so fine that it makes it very, very difficult to show that issue. Now, the case that gave absolute immunity, and this is important because this is the last thing we're going to talk about tomorrow, so this is my hook for you to keep you all here for the next day and a half, is in the absence of the ability to hold prosecutors accountable even for intentional acts of misconduct, what we're left with is criminal charges or ethics bars. Now, the Louisiana Ethics Bar has acted once, and as you said, it was a 3-month suspension. Okay? The lawyers one of the lawyers in John's case, which was in 2004, John was exonerated. The same lawyers that represented John represented 2 other men who were exonerated in 2022 and had been prosecuted by exactly the same prosecutor. He has never been disciplined. The tail on these cases is long, and on that day in 2022, those 2 men had served a combined 75 years for things that they hadn't done. So the role of these disciplinary boards is what we're left with. And we're going to talk about that and whether or not that can be changed. Because the Louisiana Disciplinary Board knows these attorneys are doing these things, and they're simply not acting on it, and that is not uncommon.
As a matter of fact, in my situation, the initial complaint was dismissed. I'll say it again. The initial ethics complaint against the prosecutor with the kidnapping of the basketball players, not turning over the police report, those things were dismissed. Said it didn't violate anything. It took us a total of 4 years to take appeal from the ethics complaint all the way up to the Supreme Court for them to reverse it and say that, nah, this is a total violation. Now, in that same opinion, Henry Roger Jordan, if you want to look it up, the majority of the Supreme Court in my case said, because I'm free, no harm was done to me. So that's why they gave us 3-month suspended sentence.
Thank you for being here, and I represent a system like the one that convicted you, and I'm really curious about, from your perspective, what are things that could happen, even yet today? It's way past the harm that's been done to you, but what are the responses that the system should have had or could still have, in your opinion, that offer some even sort of remedy for what happened to you? And I'll also, of course, say I'm sorry about what the system did to you.
So I think that one of the things for me, if a person is exonerated, I think housing, something as simple as housing. I should be able to get at the very housing. I mean, give me a HUD voucher where I can have somebody stay. I at least deserve that, because I know so many of us that's been exonerated, they have trouble getting housed, living with family that can't afford it. I mean, I don't want to say it like this, but we become a burden. I mean, I know so many, and I say friends because some of the men I met on death row that are now free, I mean, we're family. And some of the men I've grown to know and get to know that's been exonerated from death row are homeless. So at the very least, housing, medical care, and just mental health services. Some basic things that I think we should get for free.
I'm very, very sorry for what happened to you. I'll actually be speaking in a couple panels about what happened to an exoneree, my friend in Florida. In the state of Florida, we have a claims bill. You have to do a claims bill, but we have an automatic $50,000 every year, except they added a clean hands provision. You have any priors, you can't get it. You have to do a claims bill. So we make people go through hoops as well. But the one question I want to ask you, and this is something that really bothered me, and I didn't realize this till afterwards, is Lenny, our exoneree, told me that as soon as he was exonerated, everyone came out of the woodworks. Fifth cousins, sixth cousins, girls, guys, anyone, assuming that he had money, and it was almost to the point of harassment. And when he did get the claims bill, they took a big picture in Tallahassee with the check in him, and he's like, his mom said, that was the worst thing, I wish we didn't do that. So I wanted to see, did people, A, assume you're going to make all this money, and B, did people harass you? Thank you.
So I didn't experience that because everyone knew I didn't get a dime. I mean, so you're gonna come out the woodworks, you're gonna come out the woodworks to help me. No, so I didn't experience that. What I did experience though, in my situation, by me being so young, I was a child. So I came home still kind of young, 26, 27. In my situation, I had a lot of support. By me being so young, I had a lot of support. And when I came home, I was able to go to college. I went to Morehouse on a free ride. But I think I came home not prepared for life. When I first came home, I didn't get counseling. I thought because I'm free, I'm good, I'm free, I'm finished with all that. I thought that. I had never saw counseling. Going in at 16, I probably had a girlfriend, but coming home at 27, you're grown. You're not messing with little girls, you're messing with women. So my emotional level I was immature. As a result, I have 6 children with 5 different women. Because sometimes even in that situation, like, if you met me, you never would know I was on death row. I don't carry it on my shoulder. I don't use it as a crutch. I try to use it for motivation. It's not like you go around, with a loudspeaker and say, hey, I'm a death row exoneree. You don't do that. So it's easy to overlook some of my trauma or kind of turn a blind eye thinking it's not there. Because I've become so good at just masking and just carrying the pain and keeping it moving. So I think that's one of the main things I would encourage everybody that has been exonerated, or even family members or friends, or even supporters, that encourage therapy.
Are you familiar with the Visiting Room Project?
I am familiar with the visitor room, but partially familiar.
I'm sorry.
I'm partially familiar, but I'm not totally into
Basically,
the visitor room.
what you're doing. I mean, narratives are so important, and personal narratives like yours, I think, really have the power to impact people who otherwise would be oblivious to what the real consequences are of conviction of the innocent. The Visiting Room Project involves people who are serving LWOP sentences at Angola. I guess I was wondering whether the stories that you have to tell also resonate with the stories that people who are serving life without the possibility of parole or death by incarceration might tell with regard to anguish and trauma and trying to achieve agency as well as the freedom that would come with eligibility for parole. I'm wondering what the relationship is between the exonerees and those people who are trying to get more understanding for what being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole means.
So, like I said, I tell my story, one, that I hope is informative and educational for those that hear it. But for me, I do it because it's therapy. For me, I do it because it helps me. I have, like I said, I have 6 kids, and I have to explain to them what happens because I'm all over the internet. If they watch YouTube, they see that, you know, it's not like I talk to my kids about my past situation because I don't want my kids to not like the police. I don't want that. So for me, I share my story because it's therapeutic for me. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one right here, Shareef, but I just want to add also to the point of narrative mattering. Regina actually took the title of tomorrow's keynote, which is with Lester Holt and Dan Slepian of NBC News, and who went to Angola to tell some of those stories. So I hope you'll continue to do that, but that's exactly why we have you here today and them here tomorrow.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. My question, I think, is piggybacking off of you, thankfully, sort of emphasizing that you do this for therapy. This is therapeutic for you. I'm guessing that most of us, maybe even all of us in this room, don't require a lot of persuading or convincing to understand that, you know, hearing your story, there are some serious things that are broken in the system that we need to fix now, if not yesterday. But I'm guessing you also have talked to people who aren't ready to see things your way immediately. They need some persuading or convincing. So on days when you've got the headspace to engage with them, you know, what kinds of strategies have you used to persuade or convince them to see things your way, and what strategies have not worked in the past?
One of the things that I like to tell people is, what if it was your son at 16? What if it was your son or your daughter or a family member? A lot of times, like in my family, like my mom voted for Connick all those 20 years that he was in office. My mom didn't know no better. She voted him because he was the most popular person. My family was uninformed, uneducated about the criminal justice system. You know, as a matter of fact, my mom was, with all the juvenile, my mom was actually in the room during the interrogation and was trying to tell me, babe, if you know something, tell it. You understand? So I think that unless it happens to you, then you can understand. Or happens to your family. So I've had an audience where, you know, pro-death penalty. You know, but in situations like my case, like, well, you know, well, I wouldn't do it for, I don't believe in a death penalty in your situation. So it's either you believe in it or you don't. So, you know, it's the persuasion for me is I'm going to stick to the facts. And I let the facts determine your level of consciousness.
One more question.
Thanks for being here. My question is just, so I work with a lot of people who were framed, as you said. I'm a public defender in Baltimore. And I'm wondering, I work in post-conviction. For the police officers who were involved, you know, whose misconduct led to what happened to you, what consequences should there be? Do you think, I mean, because some people don't want to be persuaded, you know, some people aren't gonna, you can't convince them, right? So they don't want the training, you know. What accountability do you think there should be? Is there any kind of accountability that would actually deter that kind of behavior, do you think?
Oh, wow. I mean, because I don't know if there's anything that's going to deter a detective from calling Crime Stoppers and getting a $15,000 reward. I think reward money from Crime Stoppers should not be anonymous, because I think that being anonymous, the intent is for public safety and for safety of that person to get information. But like anything else, we know how to get around through loopholes, and it can be used for the wrong thing, like in my situation. For cases that have to be solved quickly, for not all of a sudden you have a lead that came out of nowhere, and you don't have to tell where it came from. So I think for me personally, I think Crime Stoppers being anonymous should be wiped out, and that would discourage a lot of that. We have information. That's what you hear on the news. We found information about such and such, but they don't know where it come from. So, but in my situation, nothing happened to the detective. Nothing happened to him. And it's not just a theory whether or not he called Crime Stoppers. I was doing some training for the public defender's office about right after Katrina, so it was about 2008, when they had a former detective who went on to be an investigator in the public defender's office. And as I was telling the audience about some of the things the detective did, he kept raising his hand like, I know him personally. He would never do that. No, this actually happened. So after it was all over with, this person was in the hallway and he apologized to me and told me that, he's sorry he was in there doing all that, and he feel bad now because he knew he had really did it. Because he called him and told him that he was talking about it. It was a mess, but no, he was no longer an investigator, I'll tell you that much. But just making it anonymous. So I hope something I said was informative. I hope that it was taken clearly. My intent is to just talk about, what we're here for, improving the system accuracy. Because what happened to me, it happens every day. Thank you.